EDM Council. Okay, so I'm going to give a couple of the pro forma, the slides that everybody says you have to give every time you talk for the EDM Council, which is what we do. And it is an industry consortium in data management and data governance. We have tens of thousands of members, over 350 multinational companies, and we're primarily known for the DCAM. It's kind of like a maturity assessment model for data management, data governance, and more recently a similar thing for cloud. But that's not the part of the business that I'm helping out. I work with the Data Innovation Lab, and the Data Innovation Lab is all about knowledge graphs, ontologies for industry that are developed pre-competitively for members of that industry to contribute to. Some of you may have heard of the financial industry business ontology, for which I've been lead ontologist since 2018. But the one that we're talking about today is the IDMP. So these slides you can read when you feel like it, just to give you a little bit of intro to the EDM Council. What I really want to share today is about this project that I love for identification of medicinal products. And so we've talked with Pistoia Alliance. One of the things that happened several years ago was a lovely lady from Bayer, whose name is Sheila Els, came to my bosses at the EDM Council and said, we need to launch an industry ontology effort. You guys know how to do that. FIBO is the longest lived, largest industry standard ontology that we know of, and it's continuing to be used and to expand today. So you know how to do this, you know how to deploy it. We have no clue. And so she came to my bosses and said, hey, can you participate in this? And what would it take? And we said, well, there's several things. First, you have to have agreement. You have to have sponsorship. They have to agree that this is a hard problem that they want to work on together. Otherwise, there's no point, because ontology development is not for the faint-hearted. So there are some rules we put into place. Everybody needs to agree on certain priorities, and everybody needs to decide who's going to be the common repository for everything, which is the Pistoia Alliance. So Sheila and Tom and a number of other pharmaceutical companies and their cheerleaders came together at Pistoia to form this project. And the idea was that they're going to develop an industry standard ontology addressing how drugs and the substances in them are identified. And I thought, oh, that can't be that hard. When they came to me and said, we need to do this. And they said, well, we have 5 ISO standards, six ISO standards that are supposed to help us do this. And in the European Union, the standards have been mandated, and every pharmaceutical company has to report to EMA using these standards as of next year, but it was supposed to be several years back. So they keep pushing the deadline because it's so hard to do. And they said, there's a reason why it's hard to do. The standards are ambiguous. Every pharma company implements them uniquely. Every regulatory agency, and there are many jurisdictions around the world, have implemented them differently. And so what's the point? The standards need a lot of work, and we're looking for help in doing that. And so that was the basis, and Sheila pulling it together and being the cheerleader and bringing Tom and some other folks in order to do that is what brought the project together. And so what I think is so cool is that Sheila actually said, and Tom echoed this earlier today, that this is something we need at Bayer, but we're not the only ones. And oh, by the way, everybody should agree and interpret the darn standards the same way. And so that was the goal of the project. And the EDM Council was brought in to help with data governance, data management of the ontology and all the related artifacts. And then we're part of a much larger team that is doing the implementation. But all of the kudos go to the pharma companies for actually doing this. I think there were 5 pharma companies in phase 1, 11 in phase 2 because of the results we were able to show. And now 6 have continued because they're going on to work on other ontology projects that are related to this one. And a lot of people couldn't split their time as much as they would have liked. But anyway, so this is what IDMP is about. It's bringing together these standards, defining them semantically so that everybody agrees on the terms and the definitions and how they're related, and thus can use the ontologies to produce regulatory reports across a gazillion jurisdictions around the world. And part of the problem is you go to a conference like this, you came here from some other country, you're taking some drug which you have to take for some reason, and either your luggage is lost and you forgot to put your prescription in your hand luggage, or there's some disaster and the hotel goes up in flames and you still need drugs. So now you want to know, if I'm taking a heart med in Japan, is it the same heart medication that they're offering me here to replace it, if someone could even do that? And so that's the challenge of IDMP. And it turns out that there are lots of substances in these things, and the names of those substances are totally overloaded in every single taxonomy you could look at. And then not only the names of substances, but what their function is and whether or not they're included in a particular product, all overloaded. The product names are all overloaded. Nobody knows what is, an apple to an apple. And so maybe you could figure that out if you had the molecular structure. But it takes that level of science to determine whether or not it's the same drug. And so here's a little bit about the process, because that's what folks asked me to present, but the ontology and everything else is available freely online. It's open source. You can grab it from GitHub, or there are other links throughout my slides that will be available. And feel free to do that. And if you find bugs, I'm the stuckee. So feel free to send them to me and we'll make sure that they get logged. So we are now in phase 3. Phase 1 was this initiation and kind of a minimal viable product. And the use case for that had to do with someone becoming very ill after taking a drug. And the manufacturer had had this drug on the market for a very long time, very safely, didn't understand how this person could have gotten ill in the way that they did. Turns out that they reacted to a toxin in the drug. Couldn't figure out how that toxin got into the drug because it's not in the formula for manufacturing. Turns out it leached into the product from the packaging. And it was only used, that one substance was used as a replacement for something else at one of their manufacturing facilities around the world, not all of them. But it took 60 days to figure that out. So how many people can die, or at least become very ill, in 60 days around the world? I would argue quite a few. And so that was our task. That was the MVP use case. And now they can answer that question in less than a second. So the bottom line is that got everybody's attention. All the pharma companies said, oh, okay, we're in. And so phase 2, we had 11 different companies. Phase 3 now, which is focused on implementation and production, we have 6 remaining with us, at least 2 of which are in the room. It happens. So this is the project overview for phase 3. It gives you an idea. There's an advisory board. There's a core team represented by all of the pharma companies involved. Then we have the pipeline for doing the work, right? The hosting and the ontology development and all of that effort in the middle, and back end mapping to each of the pharma companies' internal systems to ensure that the queries work for all of them, regardless of how unique their systems are. And then we have project leads and stakeholders and some downstream use cases we're working on. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we were at the beginning of this year, phase 2 ended with a version 1.0 ontology. But we didn't walk through each of the standards and attempt to model every element in each standard along the way. Instead, we've taken a use case oriented approach. What questions do we want to be able to answer at the end of this quarter or at the end of this use case? How do they touch the different standards? And then leave everything else on the table, because maybe those are less important use cases for those other parts of the ISO standards, and we've covered the most important ones from some of those pharma companies' perspectives. So now there are a bunch of different use cases that each of the pharma companies has submitted, and what I can tell you is, in one way or another, this is Bayer, in one way or another, they touch manufacturing systems, they touch regulatory report generation, they touch labeling, they touch jurisdiction-specific issues and jurisdiction agnostic issues. And we're looking at where are we going now? What other use cases are we going to address this year? And they all include some element of interoperability, some element of managing the data across systems. There's not one complete system to do any of this. And so this year, we're looking at more interoperability issues, pharmacovigilance, drug shortage challenges, and mapping to a number of the regulator systems. We have several of them already. This year, we're working on a project with the WHO they call Who Drug, and there are other things coming. And so what I have here, which is not all that important because I'd rather get to questions, are some of the critical decisions we made in order to get everybody on the same page. And they include things like policies for what are your IRIs going to look like? When you've got 11 pharma companies deciding, it's hard. What are our naming conventions going to be? What metadata do we need? What modeling patterns are we going to use over and over and over again so we have consistency, and so on and so forth. And these are some of the hard decisions we had to make up front that, as it happens, apply to almost any ontology project. And there were some observations. We reused some patterns that we have submitted to OMG out of FIBO for common patterns everybody needs. Things like identifiers and their schemes, really important for IDMP. And so of the over 800 classes, 400 relationships, 100 data attributes in IDMP-O today, more than half was from reuse of other ontologies, more than half. And there are links to some of those there, and we keep improving and adding to the libraries, and all of that's open source, and you're all welcome to use it. And the other thing is that having the pharma companies recognize those same patterns so that their implementation team recognizes those patterns so that they see it over and over again rather than having anything ad hoc in the ontology has made a huge difference in uptake. And so I have a few slides on our development methodology, which somebody had asked me to include, a little bit of the environment we use for international collaboration around the clock, since our pharma company members are highly distributed, and then a little bit of our release process so that you can see, making sure we have at least a couple of pharma companies review everything before we push the button and say go. And so we have some variations on a theme. I have the links here to some of the tools that we're using. All of that is open source as well, except of course, Jira, GitHub, Confluence that you might need a license for. But some other lessons learned. All of the things that we've done have allowed us to increasingly parameterize every query, increasingly parameterize the use of these patterns so that we have acceleration across the project. And that's been huge for us to make as much progress in a year and a half as we have. So, so those are some of the lessons learned. Another thing, having Pistoia's backing and source sponsors at all of the pharma companies who really wanted this was huge. I think that was the biggest thing. If we did not have that sponsorship, if we did not have the pharma companies really engaged, if we didn't have subject matter experts from each of the companies reviewing the work and agreeing on the terms, which for active moiety took 3 months. So I kept putting that one on the back burner because nobody would agree to what it meant. And then we would add it at the end of every terminology discussion and come back around. And finally, after 3 months, we had agreement. So that one drove me crazy, but it's good. You know, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a bioinformaticist. I'm just your average ontologist. And so therefore I didn't want to put any of my view of what the definition should be in the blend. I really wanted them to come up with it. And that's been a really great approach for us. So engagement is critical. So anyway, thank you so much. This image is from the Pistoia conference in November with some of the team members, and you can see Tom and I in the picture. So we were in Boston for the conference, but all of the links are available either from the Pistoia site or you can email me directly, and I'm happy to provide resources and give you all guidelines as to how to get started. Thank you very much.
Was there anything that came up during the development of this where the pharmaceutical companies would be concerned about intellectual property?
Very good question. So this is considered pre-competitive, which means that they're all willing to contribute to have something open source at the end because they all had the same problem. And so they really, really desperately wanted a solution. And so they took the step of going to Pistoia to do this pre-competitively so that there were no IP issues. And we say that up front on all the calls, and now we have regulators participating, and we also have some other data providers like the American Chemical Society, is that what they're called, CAS? Those folks participate from time to time. Other vendors are starting to lurk from time to time. So it's all good. From my perspective, it's something that I want to be an industry standard, and I want people to use it. And what's the sense of building it if they're not going to use it and if we're not going to make it public? So now any research organization can use it because it was done purposefully to be open source. And the ontology is now being documented as part of the set of ISO standards that were the thorn in our side to start with. Yep.
You mentioned use cases, right? That's a great way of expanding the ontology. So are those use cases published? Question number one. Question two, how do you do prioritization when you have 11 different pharma companies influencing?
Well, so they have to sit in the same room and duke it out.
Awesome.
And if they don't do that, then I have no priority. And that's really how it's happened. But some of them are on our Confluence site. Some of them, the pharmaceutical companies have decided to retain for sharing information with the members that have paid for the ontology, because they think, well, we have to have something that we keep back. But the competency questions for the first several use cases are available on the Confluence site with the link that's here.
Okay, last question. Do you think any of those use cases will influence de novo content generation through LLMs?
Oh, possibly. And several of the pharma companies are looking at doing that, because one of the things you need to do if you build an ontology that's going to be an industry standard is be really OCD like I am about metadata. And so there's as much metadata or more than you would possibly know, including the links back to all of the regulatory definitions, so that we had all of that in the ontology so you could use it for NLP or large language models or what have you. And we've done that from the outset.
Awesome, thank you.
Questions?